White Karen and cop team up against black woman, not knowing she's a Secret Service agent. Picture a quiet suburban community, simmering with hidden prejudices, where an older white woman's spiteful outlook collides with the unsuspecting determination of a young black woman. Throw in a hard-nosed police officer, eager to make a name for himself, and you have the spark that ignites a powder keg of conflicts, secrets, and revelations. What happens when prejudice blinds you to the truth? Stay tuned to Dark Stories to find out. Little do they know, the target of their ill will is no ordinary passerby. She's a highly trained Secret Service agent, ready to pull back the curtain on truth and justice. Eastonville was a small town that prided itself on tradition. Tucked neatly off the interstate in South Carolina, it had picturesque streets lined with dogwood trees and centuries-old Victorian houses. On paper, Eastonville seemed idyllic, home to hard-working families, a thriving farmers' market on weekends, and a 4th of July parade that drew crowds from neighboring counties. But just beneath the surface, a stiff current of bias and provincial thinking still ran strong. Can a single outsider unravel a town's hidden secrets? Keep watching Dark Stories to see how it unfolds. That morning, the local diner, Mary's Sunrise Cafe, was bustling with its usual breakfast crowd. Inside, the clink of plates and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee blended seamlessly with buzzing chatter. At the counter sat Sylvia Henderson, a 50-year-old white woman known to most of the townsfolk. She had lived in Eastonville her entire life and thought she had seen it all. Some found her witty, even charming, but there was an undercurrent of intolerance in her remarks, especially when she felt her way of life was threatened. Sylvia tapped her acrylic fingernails against her coffee mug, scanning the diner. She spotted a family of tourists flipping through brochures about local attractions, a group of construction workers fueling up for the day, and a few familiar faces. That's when her gaze landed on a young black woman sitting quietly at a corner booth by herself. The woman looked alert, as if on guard, wearing a crisp button-down shirt and dark jeans that matched her black boots. Sylvia's lips pinched, curiosity getting the better of her. She leaned over to whisper to the waitress, "Who is that?" The waitress shrugged. "She's not from around here. Just came in, ordered an omelet to go." Sylvia's immediate suspicion was like a reflex. She was the type who, despite never traveling far, feared the idea of outsiders bringing new ideas or cultural shifts. Over the years, her prejudice had taken root, nurtured by her reluctance to see anyone different from herself as an equal. She sipped her coffee, eyeing the woman's confident posture. Little did Sylvia know that the object of her scrutiny was Morgan Walker, a rising star in the U.S. Secret Service. Morgan had been assigned undercover to investigate a potential threat near Eastonville, rumors of a counterfeit ring that stretched into the surrounding counties. She was not in full agent mode but had the keen instincts trained into her by years of dedicated service. Her trip to Mary's Sunrise Cafe that morning was supposed to be a simple meal stop before continuing her stakeout. Sylvia, though, saw no such nuance, only a stranger, someone who didn't belong. She felt a flicker of indignation stir within. It didn't help that Morgan kept glancing at her phone, as if she was documenting something. In reality, Morgan was discreetly messaging her team's remote command center to confirm last-minute details about her next stop. To Sylvia, however, it looked like suspicious behavior. When Morgan rose to head out, leaving a tip on her table, Sylvia mumbled to no one in particular, "I bet she's up to no good." The notion solidified in her mind, something needed to be done. She refused to simply let an outsider wander around town unchecked, especially one who made her so uncomfortable just by existing. And with that, Sylvia's misguided sense of territory and power took root, setting the stage for a confrontation that would have rippling consequences far beyond what anyone in Eastonville could have foreseen. Sylvia Henderson hadn't always been so openly antagonistic. By her own recollection, she used to be kind to everyone. But ask any neighbor off the record, and they'd tell you otherwise. Growing up in Eastonville during the 1970s and 1980s, Sylvia had been conditioned by a family that spoke in coded language, phrases like, "they should stay in their own neighborhoods," or "we have our ways around here." Over time, these attitudes hardened into beliefs she rarely questioned. As an adult, Sylvia channeled her worldview into petty complaints and phone calls to the police whenever she felt something was wrong. She had Officer Chad Reynolds on speed dial, one of Eastonville's patrol cops who, like Sylvia, had grown up local. Officer Reynolds was known for being strict, but more than that, he was hungry for a reputation. He fantasized about making a big bust or single-handedly thwarting a crime spree. While he wasn't explicitly known for being racist, he certainly had a way of letting his personal biases slip through in how he patrolled the more diverse parts of town. Sometimes, Reynolds and Sylvia's outlooks converged. Whenever Sylvia sniffed out a perceived problem, like a group of teenagers skateboarding on a sidewalk or a neighbor's visiting relatives parking near her driveway, she'd call Reynolds, who never hesitated to show up. Over time, they developed a warped partnership of sorts. They didn't speak of it as such, but both realized they thrived on the sense of authority it gave them. Sylvia, the vigilant civilian watchdog; Reynolds, the enforcer. That morning, after watching Morgan Walker exit the diner, Sylvia quickly paid her bill and stepped outside. She watched Morgan head to her car, a sensible dark sedan with tinted windows. "That's not a local car," Sylvia muttered under her breath. She scribbled down the license plate on a small notepad she kept in her purse, all the while feeling an uneasy excitement. She'd call it a hunch, but in reality, it was raw prejudice. Morgan, slipping into her car, was completely unaware of Sylvia's scrutiny. She checked her phone one more time for directions. Her next stop was about 10 miles west of Eastonville, an abandoned property rumored to be a drop site for counterfeit bills. She hadn't expected to be noticed or singled out. In fact, her entire approach to this mission was to remain low-key. She certainly didn't want to stir up trouble in a small-town diner. Back at her own car, Sylvia took a moment to fumble with the keys, her eyes locked on Morgan's vehicle as it drove away. She allowed a tingle of satisfaction to course through her as she punched in Officer Reynolds' number. "Chad," she said as soon as he answered, "I've got a suspicious individual you might want to check on." She was acting funny at Mary's Sunrise Cafe, took off in a black sedan, out-of-state plates, didn't look like she was just passing through. "Calm down, Sylvia," Reynolds said, though his heart quickened at the possibility of a real lead. "Where's she headed?" Sylvia described the direction Morgan drove off in, embellishing details about how Morgan looked nervous and aggressive. In truth, Morgan had merely been quietly finishing her breakfast, but Sylvia's lens twisted the scene into a potential threat. "I'll check it out," said Reynolds. "Stay safe, and thanks for the tip." Sylvia ended the call, feeling a surge of validation. She imagined the various scenarios that might unfold, her tip leading to a major criminal being caught or at least someone who didn't belong being forced to leave town. She returned to her aging sedan, fueled by the misguided notion that she was preserving Eastonville's purity. 10 miles outside of Eastonville, Morgan parked her sedan behind a large oak tree, just out of sight of the dusty roadside. The address she'd been given was a decrepit farmhouse set back about 100 yards from a gravel driveway. Paint peeled from the wooden exterior, and broken windows stared like empty eyes at the surrounding farmland. The air smelled of damp hay and lingering morning dew. This was the suspected drop site for a counterfeit currency ring that had been operating along the I-95 corridor. Morgan had been assigned here by a task force within the U.S. Secret Service that specialized in financial crimes. She joined the service 5 years prior, after excelling in her criminal justice degree at Howard University and undergoing rigorous training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. Her role demanded vigilance and a keen eye for patterns. She'd learned early on that infiltration and subtlety often reaped bigger rewards than overt force. Morgan carefully observed the perimeter. She saw a faint tire track near the side of the farmhouse, indicating recent activity. So far, no signs of movement. She stepped out of her car, making sure to conceal her badge in her back pocket. She wore no visible holster, preferring a hidden carry method that kept her sidearm discreet. Approaching slowly, she kept her footsteps light on the gravel to avoid drawing attention. Inside, the farmhouse was eerily silent. The wooden floors creaked, and dust particles floated in slivers of sunlight from the broken windows. She methodically explored each room, scanning for clues, discarded paper scraps, unusual footprints, or packaging materials that might have been used to transport counterfeit bills. She found a crumpled soda can with an out-of-state label and a couple of footprints that looked fresh in a patch of dried mud by the back door. Still, nothing concrete. But that was how these investigations often went, hours or days of sifting through false leads before stumbling upon something big. Standing in the decaying living room, Morgan recalled a debriefing at the Secret Service field office in Columbia, South Carolina. A suspect had confessed that this farmhouse was used occasionally by a ring trafficking counterfeit U.S. currency. The ring's rumored leader, a man named Darius Marrow, had been linked to a network that spanned multiple states. Morgan's job was to confirm whether this location was indeed active and, if so, gather enough evidence to justify a full raid. Outside, the sound of gravel crunching under tires made her instincts go on high alert. She peered through a crack in the boarded-up window and spotted a police cruiser. The officer behind the wheel was scanning the property, likely responding to a call. Panic was not in Morgan's nature, but she knew she had to handle this delicately. Being discovered by local law enforcement could compromise her undercover position, especially if this was just an overzealous cop. Slipping out the back door, Morgan crouched near the farmhouse wall, listening. The car door opened and then closed with a slam. Heavy footsteps approached. She heard a muffled voice smile, confident, with a certain edge. She took a calculated risk and peered around the corner. Indeed, it was a policeman, though she didn't recognize him from the local or state agencies she'd coordinated with. "Anybody here?" he called out, hand resting on his holster. Morgan weighed her options. She could reveal herself as a federal agent, but that might blow her entire assignment if word spread quickly in a small town. Alternatively, she could slip away quietly and avoid detection. The potential risk was that this officer might start poking around, interfering with her investigation. In the end, Morgan chose caution. She stayed hidden, hoping the officer would assume the place was empty and leave. She could coordinate with her Secret Service team later, possibly loop in local authorities under official channels if need be. After a few tense minutes, she heard the policeman sigh. "No sign of anything," he muttered. Then came the sound of gravel crunching again as he circled around to the side of the house. Morgan held her breath, pressing herself against the wall. She heard his radio crackle, though she couldn't make out the words. Eventually, the footsteps receded, a car door slammed again, and the cruiser started back down the gravel driveway. Morgan let out a slow exhale. The fiasco at the diner must have triggered some local busybody to call the cops. She'd encountered that attitude more times than she cared to admit, especially working undercover in smaller communities. She resolved to wrap up her sweep quickly and leave before anyone else showed up. Little did she know that her quiet operation had already sparked Sylvia's prejudice, which would intertwine with an ambitious officer Reynolds' sense of duty. Their misguided alliance was about to escalate, pushing Morgan into a collision course with a small town's hidden shadows. Officer Chad Reynolds pulled out of the gravel driveway, frustration gnawing at him. He'd been convinced by Sylvia's phone call that he might catch someone in the middle of a criminal act. Instead, he found nothing but a dilapidated farmhouse that looked abandoned. Still, something felt off, call it a cop's intuition. The dust on the floor of one of the rooms had been recently disturbed, and there was a faint impression of footprints leading to the back. It was enough to keep his suspicion alive. As he drove back toward Eastonville, he replayed Sylvia's frantic phone call in his mind. She was acting funny. Black sedan, out-of-state plates. Trouble. Sylvia was always quick to label anything new or unknown as a threat. Normally, Reynolds might have shrugged it off, but he was itching for a chance to prove himself. He'd spent 6 years on the force, having joined right out of community college with big dreams of becoming a detective one day or even a member of a federal task force. He'd grown impatient with routine traffic stops and domestic disputes. He wanted a high-profile case that would put his name in the papers. When he returned to the station, Reynolds logged the farmhouse visit in his daily report, noting that there were signs of possible trespassing. He then spent the next hour running the partial plate number Sylvia had given him through the system. Initially, nothing popped, but with a bit of extra digging, calling in a friend at the Department of Motor Vehicles in Columbia, he learned the car was a rental, picked up at Charlotte Douglas International Airport the previous day. That confirmed for him that the driver was likely from out of town. He jotted down the details on a notepad and leaned back in his squeaky office chair. A small part of him wondered if he was overreacting, another part believed this was exactly the kind of break he needed. Over the next few hours, he tried to glean more information. He considered contacting a friend in the local FBI field office, but that might be too big a leap. He didn't want to look like an overeager local officer chasing phantoms. But the lines between caution and ambition blurred in his mind. The station's fluorescent light flickered overhead as Reynolds mulled over his next steps. He was about to call it a night when Sylvia Henderson herself unexpectedly showed up. She spotted him at his desk and approached, brimming with curiosity. "Chad," she said, her voice hushed, "did you find anything at that old farmhouse?" "Not exactly," he admitted, "but there were signs that somebody had been there recently." Sylvia's eyes lit up with vindication. "You see? I told you that woman was up to something. Did you get a good look at her? Was she there?" "No, I didn't find her, but I found footprints." "Could have been her, could have been someone else. Did you see where she went after she left the diner? Anything else suspicious?" Sylvia shook her head. "No, just that she seemed all secretive, looking at her phone like she was mapping out something." Reynolds let out a heavy breath. "All right, well, I'm keeping an eye out for that black sedan. If you see her again, you give me a call." Sylvia nodded vigorously, a look of smug satisfaction crossing her face as she sauntered out. Once alone, Reynolds told himself he was doing his duty, protecting the town from potential criminals. Yet beneath that was a simpler truth: he yearned for recognition, for a dramatic story he could claim as his. Ironically, he and Sylvia were alike in that respect. She craved a sense of influence, he craved validation. Together, they could end up twisting a mundane situation into something far more explosive. Meanwhile, Morgan Walker was busy filing a brief report to her superiors from a roadside motel outside Eastonville. She noted the suspicious footprints, the overall emptiness of the farmhouse, and the near encounter with the local cop. She concluded with possibility that local authorities may be onto suspicious activity at the farmhouse. Recommend caution and possible coordination with local PD after further intel is gathered. Unaware that the wheels of local prejudice and ambition were already in motion, Morgan planned her next step. She hoped to quietly wrap up her mission in a couple of days, but fate and the meddling of Sylvia and Reynolds had other plans. The next morning, Morgan woke early at the Eastonville Motor Lodge, a modest motel that catered mostly to travelers passing through. She had chosen it for its anonymity, a place where no one asked questions, especially about a single guest paying in cash with minimal luggage. She downed a cup of lukewarm instant coffee while checking updates on her phone. No new leads had come in on Darius Marrow or his associates, so she decided to do a broader sweep of the area. Shortly after 8 a.m., she hopped into her rental and drove into Eastonville's downtown to look around. The main drag was a single lane in each direction, lined with small businesses: a hardware store, a bakery, a thrift shop, and a pharmacy. People were out strolling, greeting each other, the pace slow and relaxed. Morgan parked near the old courthouse, noticing its grand columns and a commemorative statue honoring fallen soldiers from past wars. She walked the sidewalks, blending in as just another passerby, though she sensed the occasional sideways glance from locals who recognized she wasn't one of them. At a small community park, she sat on a bench, casually reading a local newspaper. The front page featured a story about a recent county fair, while the second page covered minor crimes, mostly break-ins or petty theft. She was just about to fold the paper when she noticed the headlines in the next section: local residents concerned about out-of-state visitors, police investigate suspicious activity at old farmhouse. It was a small piece, but Morgan's stomach tightened. The short write-up quoted an unnamed local source, certainly Sylvia, who claimed an outsider was lurking around. The article also cited Officer Chad Reynolds, who vaguely mentioned investigating possible trespassing. Morgan frowned. This was exactly the kind of publicity she didn't need. If the criminals she was tracking saw the news, they might become spooked and alter their plans. She decided it was time to coordinate discreetly with her field office. She typed out a quick text to her supervisor: local PD has some suspicion. Need to neutralize or incorporate them soon. Asterisk, how will Morgan outsmart a town on high alert? Stay with dark stories for the thrilling twist, asterisk. Meanwhile, across town at a small real estate office, Sylvia was busy creating drama out of thin air. She was a part-time clerk there, a job that kept her connected to the grapevine. She'd spent the morning telling anyone who would listen about the dangerous stranger she'd spotted at the diner. To some, she insisted the woman was casing houses. To others, she whispered about possible drug deals or gang affiliations, unfounded stories she wove with chilling certainty. "You mark my words," Sylvia told a co-worker, "something big is about to happen. I bet she's working with a whole crew of them, sneaking around. Chad's on it, though. He'll catch them." This fear-mongering seeped into the community consciousness. A few people reported glimpses of a dark sedan. Someone even claimed to have seen Morgan on the outskirts of town, taking pictures. In reality, Morgan was photographing license plates at another property suspected of being a stash house. By midday, the rumor mill was spinning so fast that folks were calling the police station, demanding to know what was being done about this outsider threat. Officer Reynolds felt a swell of both anxiety and thrill. On one hand, he worried he was chasing shadows, fueled by Sylvia's overactive imagination. On the other, he was excited by the possibility that, if correct, he'd be the hero who exposed a crime ring. The phone calls pouring into the station only amplified this feeling. People were panicked and looking to him for reassurance. By the time Morgan returned to her car near the courthouse, she sensed the atmosphere had changed. She caught more than one person glaring at her suspiciously. Even a couple of store owners eyed her warily from behind their windows. It was as if the entire town had turned into a single watchful eye. Deciding that was enough reconnaissance for the day, Morgan slipped into her sedan, planning to check the farmhouse again after dark. As she pulled away, a pair of headlights turned on from a vehicle parked across the street, a police cruiser. Morgan watched her rearview mirror as the cruiser followed at a distance. Her instincts told her to remain calm and not speed off. If they wanted to pull her over, they would. After several blocks, the cruiser turned onto a different street, a small relief, but it confirmed something important: the local PD was indeed tailing her. She made a mental note: time is running out for stealth. In an unmarked car not far away, a second policeman took pictures of Morgan's sedan. This was an unsanctioned maneuver, but one that Officer Reynolds had orchestrated. He'd asked a fellow officer to gather any evidence that might tie Morgan's presence to suspicious activities. Reynolds was beyond mere curiosity now, he was building a case, or so he believed. Between Sylvia's rumor campaign and Reynolds' escalating watchfulness, tensions in Eastonville were ratcheting up, and Morgan, unaware just how rampant the gossip had become, was walking a tightrope between completing her federal duty and maintaining her cover. Night settled over Eastonville, bringing with it an uneasy stillness. The moon hung low, casting elongated shadows across empty streets and shuttered storefronts, perfect conditions for Morgan's plan: a return to the farmhouse to see if any of the counterfeits might show up under cover of darkness. She had received word from her supervisor that additional federal agents would be arriving within 2 days, but Morgan felt an urgency to stay on top of things. Shortly before 10 p.m., she parked her sedan a good half-mile away from the farmhouse, choosing to approach on foot through a patch of woods that lined the property. The night air was thick with humidity, and cicadas whirred ominously. Morgan wore dark clothing and carried a small flashlight, along with her sidearm concealed at her waist. She moved with quiet purpose, every step mindful of twigs and brush that could give away her presence. She switched her phone to silent mode and began recording video, zooming in to capture the men's silhouettes. If these were indeed counterfeits, she needed evidence. The men seemed to unload something from the truck bed, large black duffel bags. Morgan couldn't see what was inside, but from her experience, it could be anything from contraband to printing materials. Suddenly, a flash of red and blue lights illuminated the front of the farmhouse. Morgan tensed as she saw a police cruiser roar up the gravel driveway, siren off but emergency lights spinning. The men in the pickup sprang into action, throwing the duffel bags back into the truck. One of them yelled, "Cops!" They scrambled inside the cabin, started the engine, and sped off into a nearby field, the truck bouncing violently over uneven terrain. Morgan's heart sank. This was not how she wanted it to go down. Her cover was effectively blown in that moment. The suspects, spooked by local law enforcement, would likely vanish. She stepped back among the trees, trying to remain hidden as she watched the police cruiser. To her astonishment, she recognized Officer Reynolds stepping out, gun drawn, scanning the darkness with a flashlight. Reynolds advanced cautiously, possibly believing the suspicious woman Morgan might be there. He had no idea he just scared off two major suspects in a federal counterfeit operation. Will Morgan's mission collapse under the weight of small-town suspicion? Don't miss the explosive climax on Dark Stories, *. From behind the cedar tree, Morgan debated whether to confront Reynolds. She weighed the risk of outing herself as a federal agent, but the moment was forced upon her sooner than she could decide. A second police cruiser arrived, and outstepped none other than Sylvia Henderson. Her presence at a police operation was absurd, but her relationship with Reynolds had apparently granted her special access. She stood behind the open door of the cruiser, searching the darkness with her own flashlight, her face set in a determined scowl. "Is she here?" Sylvia hissed to Reynolds. "I saw that truck speeding off." "Could be them." "Don't know yet," Reynolds replied. "Stay back, Sylvia, this is official police business." Morgan's frustration rose. This entire scene was chaos. The men who had just fled were likely on their way to destroy any evidence. Her investigation was compromised. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from the shadows, hands raised at shoulder level to show she posed no immediate threat. "Officer," she said, voice steady, "you need to stand down." Freeze!" Reynolds shouted, flashlight blinding her as he swung it in her direction. He aimed his service weapon, finger near the trigger. Sylvia let out a startled gasp. "That's her," she cried, pointing. Morgan's training kicked in. She didn't reach for her weapon. She didn't lower her hands. Instead, she spoke clearly and calmly. "I'm a federal agent, Secret Service. My credentials are in my back pocket. I'm reaching for them now." "Stop talking." Reynolds barked. Adrenaline coursed through him. He was so used to Sylvia's stories that he half expected Morgan to dash away or draw a weapon. But her composure threw him off. Morgan slowly reached back and produced her badge. She held it out, letting the flashlight's beam catch the gleam. "Officer, I'm part of an undercover investigation," she explained, controlling her breathing. "You've just scared off two suspects involved in a counterfeit ring. I need you to call for backup, specifically a federal contact." Sylvia's face contorted in disbelief and anger. "What is this, a trick?" she spat. "Secret Service?" "My foot." "Sylvia, get back." Reynolds roared, pushing her aside. Morgan stayed calm but stern. "Officer Reynolds, I need immediate assistance. Those men in the truck are prime suspects. They have likely fled across that field. If we act now, we can catch them." But Reynolds remained frozen, the shock of discovering that the suspicious outsider was a federal agent rocking him to his core. "Why didn't you coordinate with us if you're working a federal case?" he demanded. "I intended to, but needed to maintain my cover until I had enough evidence," Morgan said firmly. "I was close until your arrival spooked them." Sylvia finally found her voice, though it cracked with fury. "This is some kind of con, Chad. Don't let her fool you." Morgan turned her gaze on Sylvia and, despite her professionalism, couldn't help a flash of irritation. "Ma'am, please stay out of this. You have no jurisdiction here." Sylvia's face reddened. Her world was collapsing, the assumption of Morgan as some dangerous stranger was disintegrating before her very eyes, replaced by the reality that Morgan was someone far more accomplished and legitimate than Sylvia ever imagined. Reynolds lowered his weapon slightly, wrestling with a swirl of conflicting emotions. On one hand, he knew he should comply with a federal agent. On the other, he felt blindsided, almost betrayed, that his big lead had been nothing more than a Secret Service operation. Before he could respond, a distant roar of an engine broke the moment. All three turned to see headlights bouncing across the field, likely the suspects circling back or another vehicle entirely. Urgency seized Morgan. She turned to Reynolds. "Officer, we need to chase them now or coordinate a lockdown of the perimeter. Do you copy?" "Yes," Reynolds stuttered. Switching his radio on. "Dispatch, we have an active situation at the old farmhouse. Possible suspects fleeing in." As Sylvia, still clinging to her preconceived notions, tried one more time. "Chad, don't trust her. She's tricking you so she can get away. Sylvia, that's enough. Reynolds shouted. He took a decisive step forward, pointing at Morgan's badge. I see the credentials. It's real. Now let me do my job. In that charged moment, the illusions that had fueled Sylvia's small-minded vendetta began to crack. The tension hung in the muggy night air, thick with unspoken realizations. The real criminals were out there, escaping, while she and Reynolds had fixated on the wrong target. Morgan, exasperated, motioned toward the field. We're wasting time. Either help me or get out of my way. Reynolds nodded, stepping aside. All right, let's move. Stay behind me, Sylvia. And with that, the balance of power shifted dramatically. Morgan Walker, once labeled a suspicious intruder, Sekarang took the lead in an official capacity. But the damage was done. The suspects were on the run, and Eastonville's illusions of safety would soon be shattered. The early hours of the morning found Morgan back at the Eastonville police station, seated across from a visibly unsettled Officer Reynolds and a silent, brooding Sylvia Henderson. Morgan had insisted on filing a formal report, detailing not only the near capture of the counterfeit suspects but also the interference by local police. 2 other Eastonville officers hovered nearby, looking on with a mixture of confusion and awe at the presence of a Secret Service agent in their small station. Reynolds cleared his throat as he typed out Morgan's statement. I apologize for the misunderstanding, he said, voice subdued. We had no idea you were here on official business. Morgan kept her tone professional. I understand how it might have looked, but you could have handled this differently, especially with the rumors floating around. My operation was nearly compromised. Sylvia sat with arms crossed, her expression still defiant. She glared at Morgan as though her very presence was an affront. Then why didn't you notify the local PD, she demanded. Morgan's patience was running thin. Ma'am, with all due respect, undercover operations often require secrecy from everyone, including local law enforcement, until specific intelligence is confirmed. There are procedures in place that I follow for everyone's safety. Reynolds tried to steer the conversation. So, these men in the truck, did you recognize them? Morgan nodded. They matched the general description of known associates of a man named Darius Marrow. If so, they're part of a multi-state counterfeit ring that we've been tracking for weeks. You showing up at the farmhouse caused them to flee. We need to move fast to figure out where they're going next. Sighing heavily, Reynolds massaged the bridge of his nose. I'll put out a bolo for the truck. We don't have a plate, though. I recorded some video footage, Morgan offered. We might see partial digits on the rear plate or at least identify the vehicle's make and model more precisely. Reynolds swiveled the computer monitor to Morgan. Let's have a look. As Morgan connected her phone to upload the footage, Sylvia, still simmering, stood abruptly. I've seen enough, she said, turning to Reynolds. She added, I'll let you handle this, but I'm not convinced she's who she says she is. That ID could be fake for all we know. Sit down, Sylvia, Reynolds said, for once snapping at her. You're not going anywhere. I need you to give a statement too about everything you saw and all those calls you made to get me out there in the first place. Something in his tone made Sylvia hesitate. She recognized for the first time that she was under scrutiny for her role in this fiasco. She sat down again with a huff, casting daggers at Morgan. Once Morgan's footage was uploaded, Reynolds and another officer leaned in to examine it. The truck was indeed a dark-colored pickup, possibly an older model Ford. The license plate was partially obscured by mud, but a few letters and numbers were visible. We might be able to cross-reference that with state records, one officer said. At least narrow it down. Morgan nodded. I'll send this to my field office in Columbia. They can run a regional search. Also, can you make sure roadblocks are set up on the highways leading out of town? Reynolds glanced at the clock. It was nearing 5 a.m. It's a bit late, but I'll see what we can do. We might have missed our chance tonight. Morgan's jaw tightened. Missed opportunities were the bane of law enforcement operations. Still, she held out hope that the suspects might make a mistake. As for Sylvia, she began tapping her foot, arms still folded. "I don't know why I have to be here," she mumbled. Morgan turned her cool gaze on her. "Because your baseless suspicions set a lot of these events in motion, ma'am. Had you not called Officer Reynolds, we might have made a successful bust tonight." Sylvia bristled, her face reddening. "I was only doing my civic duty. You, sneaking around the diner in that old farmhouse, what was I supposed to think?" Morgan fought to keep her composure. "You could have thought that maybe, just maybe, you didn't have the full picture. Instead of jumping to conclusions, you could have asked a question or two." Reynolds intervened, worried the conversation might escalate. "Okay, let's keep this productive." He handed Sylvia a clipboard with a form. "Please document exactly what you witnessed and how you came to suspect Agent Walker." Sylvia snatched the pen, muttering under her breath. Morgan turned back to the computer, her mind racing ahead to next steps. She messaged her field office with a summary of the night's events. She was already certain that her cover in Eastonville was blown, which meant she'd need official authority to continue. The fiasco was far from over. Later that morning, Morgan stepped outside the Eastonville police station to find her colleagues from the Secret Service had arrived. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows were parked near the curb. Special Agent Andrea Gibson, Morgan's direct supervisor, emerged, her short dark hair immaculate despite the long drive. She extended a hand as Morgan approached. "Heard you had an eventful night," Gibson said quietly. Morgan exhaled, tension evident in her eyes. "That's putting it lightly. The local PD stumbled onto the operation. We lost 2 suspects in a pickup, but I caught part of their plate." Gibson nodded. "We've already started cross-referencing. Come inside. We need to coordinate with these local officers." They returned to the station, where Officer Reynolds was briefing a couple more local cops about the potential suspects, as well as the partial plate number. Sylvia was conspicuously absent, sent home for the time being after finishing her written statement. Morgan felt a mix of relief and lingering frustration. Sylvia's meddling had cost her valuable ground in the investigation. Agent Gibson took command of the meeting, her demeanor crisp and authoritative. "Thank you for your cooperation. We'll need your full support going forward. This counterfeit ring is dangerous, likely armed. Our priority is to apprehend them without endangering civilians." The local officers nodded, mostly in awe of the federal presence. Reynolds forced himself to meet Gibson's gaze. "We're willing to help any way we can. We have limited manpower, but I'll make sure the roads are patrolled and we share any intel we get." Gibson gave a curt smile. "That's much appreciated, Officer Reynolds. Agent Walker will be leading point on this investigation from our side. Let's keep all communications direct so we don't have any more misunderstandings." Morgan couldn't miss the slight tension in that last phrase. Reynolds looked at her and gave a small, apologetic nod. In the swirl of activity, agents conferring, local cops fielding phone calls, he finally stepped close enough to Morgan to speak in a low voice. "I'm sorry," he said, eyes darting around. "I let my ambition get the better of me." Morgan studied him. She could sense his remorse, but also his wounded pride. "I appreciate the apology, officer. Let's move forward. Right now, I need your help to track down that truck." "Already on it," Reynolds said, gesturing to a computer terminal. "Dispatch is calling neighboring counties." They spent the next few hours poring over maps of the region, discussing possible routes the suspects might take. Agents came in and out, checking phone logs, verifying witness accounts, and coordinating with state troopers for roadblocks. Everyone was on high alert. By mid-afternoon, word came in that a pickup matching the partial plate was spotted at a gas station off a rural highway about 20 miles north. The Secret Service team quickly mobilized. Morgan and Gibson hopped into one SUV, while Reynolds and 2 local officers followed in a cruiser. They arrived at the gas station, only to discover the truck had departed minutes earlier. Security camera footage showed 2 men hurriedly refueling, the same duffel bags in the truck bed. In the grainy footage, Morgan recognized at least one face: Terry T.J. Hayes, a known associate of Darius Merrow. "They're definitely spooked," Morgan said to Gibson. "They must realize we're onto them." Gibson slammed the SUV's door in frustration. "We keep chasing them like this, they'll slip away for good. Let's see if we can intercept them, maybe set up a sting along Highway 14. Reynolds approached, radio in hand. "We have a tip that they might be heading toward the state line." He hesitated, then asked, "Mind if I come along on the sting?" Gibson looked to Morgan, who weighed the situation. Despite the rough start, local knowledge could be crucial, and Reynolds seemed genuinely committed now. "Yes, come on," Morgan said. "But Agent Gibson calls the shots." Reynolds nodded, relieved. The uneasy alliance between federal agents and local police was now fully operational, set against a ticking clock. Meanwhile, the shadow of Sylvia Henderson still loomed, though out of sight. In many ways, her meddling had inadvertently accelerated the timetable of this bust. As the convoy rolled out, Morgan felt a knot in her stomach. This chase was more than just nabbing counterfeiters. It was about proving she could navigate hostile or skeptical locals and still get the job done. If they succeeded, she might earn the trust of a community that, thanks to people like Sylvia, had little faith in outsiders. If they failed, the criminals would vanish, and Morgan's career would take a serious hit. The stage was set for a high-stakes confrontation. With each passing mile, the tension grew thicker, and Morgan couldn't shake the feeling that something even more dramatic was about to happen. As dusk settled over the scenic back roads, the Secret Service SUVs and the Eastonville police cruiser barreled down Highway 14. The radio chatter crackled with updates, a possible sighting of the suspect vehicle near an old roadside motel. Agent Gibson directed the team to close in from multiple angles, determined not to let the truck slip away again. Morgan rode in the lead SUV, scanning the darkening horizon. The tension in her shoulders refused to ease. She knew the suspects would be even more desperate now, cornered and well aware that both federal and local authorities were converging on them. People like T.J. Hayes and his associates had a history of violent behavior when trapped. "Eyes on a black pickup, no plate visible," came a voice over the radio. "Parked behind the Sunset Pines Motel off exit 23. "That's our spot," Gibson replied. "Vehicles converge on the main entrance. Agents, proceed with caution, they could be armed." Morgan felt her pulse quicken as their SUV pulled into the motel parking lot. The neon motel sign flickered, casting eerie shadows on worn-out cars. The suspect truck was indeed there, partially concealed by a large dumpster. A battered motel room door stood ajar, dim light pouring out. Gibson motioned for Morgan and two other agents to approach on foot around the corner. Officer Reynolds and his partners circled to the back of the building, guns drawn. The plan was to trap the suspects in a pincer move. Morgan's heart pounded, her training surging to the forefront. She ducked low, pressing against the motel's exterior wall. Agent Gibson nodded, and Morgan took point, inching toward the open door. Suddenly, a flash of movement, one of the suspects burst out of the room and sprinted toward the truck. Morgan reacted on pure instinct, chasing after him. "Stop! Secret Service," she shouted. The suspect ignored her, fumbling with keys as he yanked the driver's door open. Morgan could see the bed of the truck was still loaded with duffel bags. Her mind raced. If he escaped, the counterfeit evidence would vanish, and so would any leads on Marrow. She sprinted full tilt, bridging the gap in seconds. The suspect managed to start the engine, but Morgan reached the driver's side door, yanking it open. They struggled, arms tangled as the suspect tried to force the door closed. In that chaotic instant, the suspect swung a fist, catching Morgan in the jaw. Pain flared, but she refused to let go, using a defensive maneuver to twist his arm, forcing him to drop the keys. The engine died. Another agent arrived, helping restrain the suspect while Morgan cuffed him. The man cursed and kicked, but Morgan's adrenaline-fueled grip didn't budge. Gunfire suddenly erupted from somewhere behind the motel. Morgan and the other agent dropped low, dragging the cuffed suspect with them for cover. "Shots fired! Shots fired!" crackled over the radio. Morgan's eyes darted around. "Where's that coming from?" "Near the backside of the building." Reynolds and his partner had cornered a second suspect, T.J. Hayes himself, armed with a handgun. Hayes fired at the officers, who dove behind a parked car, returning fire. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off metal and concrete. Morgan left the subdued suspect with the other agent and sprinted toward the back, heart pounding. She rounded the corner, hugging the motel's outer wall. Peering around, she saw Hayes crouched behind a low brick planter. Reynolds and his partner were pinned down behind a car, radioing for backup. Hayes's eyes, wild, popped up to fire again. Morgan seized the moment, stepping out just enough to aim her Glock. She commanded in a clear, clipped voice, "Drop the weapon." "Secret Service." Hayes turned, pointing the gun at her. The tension spiked. Morgan steadied her aim, ready to fire if necessary. The morning sun shone brightly over Eastonville, as if attempting to cleanse the small town of the prior night's drama. Back at the police station, the suspects were processed and prepared for federal transfer. Local news vans had already begun to arrive, eager to report on the dramatic takedown of a counterfeit ring on the outskirts of town. Inside, Officer Reynolds found himself facing a barrage of questions from reporters. The station's tiny lobby was cluttered with camera equipment. Reynolds managed to convey a subdued version of events, carefully omitting details of his initial blunder and emphasizing the joint effort between Eastonville PD and federal agents. Morgan stood nearby, arms folded, quietly observing. Agent Gibson had returned to the field office to start building the case against T.J. Hayes, leaving Morgan to tidy up loose ends. Sylvia Henderson also arrived, this time summoned by the police chief, who wanted clarity on how she ended up at the farmhouse and in the midst of a police operation. She strode in, wearing a prim blouse and her usual air of self-importance, only to find Morgan standing by a wall, reviewing files. Their eyes met, the tension palpable. Sylvia tried to avert her gaze but then forced herself to glare at Morgan, as though challenging her. Morgan maintained a neutral expression, refusing to let Sylvia's hostility rattle her. The police chief, a gruff older man named Harold Dean, appeared. His gaze swept over Sylvia, then Morgan. "In my office, both of you," he said curtly. A short while later, they sat across a large wooden desk, sunlight filtering through blinds. The air conditioner hummed, barely cutting through the tense atmosphere. Chief Dean clasped his hands. "We've had quite the eventful couple of days. Agent Walker, I've read the preliminary reports. Thank you for your service. You've done us all a favor by helping stop a criminal ring." Morgan inclined her head. "Just doing my job, sir." The chief turned to Sylvia. "Miss Henderson, you were present at the scene last night without proper authority. You also provided multiple calls to dispatch about Agent Walker's suspicious behavior, which led to a potential conflict with a federal investigation. I'd like to hear your side." Sylvia flushed. I was just being vigilant. This town is close-knit, and I didn't recognize her. She was poking around places she shouldn't be. I had every right to be concerned." Chief Dean sighed. "Vigilance is fine, but we have protocols. Showing up on active scenes uninvited is reckless, not to mention your direct involvement almost cost us the chance to catch serious criminals." Sylvia's voice trembled with indignation. "I never meant to." The chief raised a hand, silencing her. "We have it from multiple witnesses, Miss Henderson, that you insisted on riding along with Officer Reynolds. That endangered both you and our operation. Now, I'm considering further action, but at the very least, you're going to receive a formal warning to stay out of police business unless explicitly requested." Sylvia opened her mouth to protest, but the chief's stern expression froze her words. Morgan felt a twinge of satisfaction, though she wasn't one to revel in another's downfall. Still, Sylvia's racist assumptions had nearly destroyed Morgan's operation. Some accountability was overdue. The chief then turned to Morgan. "Agent Walker, you'll find no hostility from me or this department. We appreciate your cooperation and regret any mishaps." "Thank you, Chief," Morgan said. "All I want is for the suspects to face justice and for the people of Eastonville to feel safe." "Understood. You're free to finalize your paperwork and coordinate with the feds however you need. If you require local support, you have it. With that, the meeting concluded. Morgan stood to leave, but Sylvia lingered, an array of emotions flickering across her face: anger, pride, shame, and something resembling regret. She bit her lip, looking as though she wanted to speak. Morgan decided to extend a tiny olive branch. "Ma'am," she said gently, "I hope next time you'll consider that someone who looks different from you might also be here to help." Sylvia bristled, but no retort came. She stared at Morgan for a moment, then turned away. For Morgan, that was enough of an answer. She walked out of the chief's office, reflecting on the strangeness of it all, how ignorance could spin a simple meal stop into near catastrophe. She wouldn't hold her breath for a heartfelt apology from Sylvia, but at least the woman faced consequences, however mild. Karma had a way of catching up, and in a small town like Eastonville, reputations didn't escape scrutiny. In the days that followed, local news outlets seized on the dramatic story. They ran headlines like "Secret Service Agent Foils Counterfeit Ring, Small Town Left Reeling." Interviews with Morgan and Agent Gibson were kept brief, revealing only the essentials. For Morgan, it was a whirlwind of paperwork, evidence cataloging, and coordination with federal prosecutors. She barely had a moment to breathe. Sylvia Henderson, on the other hand, found her local celebrity tarnished. People who once tolerated her nosy ways now whispered about her reckless behavior. "Did you hear how she almost ruined the bust?" some asked at the grocery store. Others, who had once admired her outspoken nature, started to see it for what it was: baseless suspicion rooted in racism and fearmongering. She tried to carry on as before, complaining about small issues, stirring up neighborhood controversies, but the responses she got were different now. Neighbors cut her off with excuses or turned away. Rumors of potential legal action against her for interfering with police operations swirled, though it was unlikely to materialize. Still, the social backlash was real, and it weighed heavily on her. A few older residents stood by her side, complaining privately that outsiders should announce themselves, but even they saw the tide turning. On her final day, Morgan stood outside the police station, waiting for an official car to pick her up. She watched the townspeople go about their daily routines, noticing how some recognized her now, offering tentative nods or small waves. Their gestures seemed to say, "We misjudged you, and we're sorry," or at least, "We know who you are now, and we respect you." That was enough for Morgan, who cherished small victories where ignorance was concerned. Months after Morgan Walker's departure from Eastonville, life moved forward, but not without ripples from the events that transpired. Sylvia Henderson found herself increasingly isolated. She lost her part-time job at the real estate office after her boss decided her notoriety was bad for business. Word spread that she was the woman who stirred up a baseless witch hunt and nearly cost a federal sting its success. The final blow came when she attempted to run for a seat on the local Community Affairs Committee. Her application was roundly rejected. Her neighbors, tired of her meddling, actively voted against her. One day, a petition circulated to remove her from her volunteer post at the library's reading program, citing her unwelcome presence and divisive attitudes. She tried to fight it but eventually resigned under pressure. Officer Chad Reynolds remained on the force, but his path toward promotion was effectively derailed. When the department considered candidates for detective, Reynolds was passed over. The reason wasn't spelled out, but he knew the fiasco involving Sylvia and the undercover agent was still fresh in everyone's mind. Instead, he was moved to a community liaison role, less prestige but a chance for redemption. He used it as an opportunity to genuinely connect with different parts of Eastonville's population. In a way, it was his karmic lesson that real policing is about understanding and serving the community, not just chasing headlines. Over time, he found a measure of peace, learning that humility and empathy could be more rewarding than ambition alone. Morgan Walker continued to excel in the Secret Service. She carried the scars and lessons from Eastonville, forging a steely resolve to remain calm under pressure, especially when faced with prejudice. Her name came up for a specialized detail at the White House, a significant honor for an agent of her tenure, though she ended up in a different high-profile assignment. The recognition alone was a testament to her skill and dedication. Her colleagues joked that she had a knack for flushing out the rats, referencing her success in the Eastonville counterfeit ring. But Morgan rarely talked about Eastonville. She'd done her job there, and that was enough. Eastonville itself underwent subtle changes. Embarrassed by the national attention, the town council launched a diversity and outreach initiative, hosting small events and seminars in an attempt to modernize and move beyond its insular reputation. Attendance was modest, but seeds were planted. Some younger residents, inspired by the entire incident, pushed for more inclusive policies in town, ranging from more diverse hiring in local government to opening new community spaces. As for Sylvia, she grew increasingly bitter, blaming everyone but herself for her downfall. She'd glare at neighbors who once chatted pleasantly with her, not comprehending that her own actions had severed those ties. Quietly, she sold her house, taking what remained of her pride to a different town where people didn't know her name or her story. She hoped to start fresh, but the lesson hovered in the back of her mind: sometimes, the hard truth is that you are your own downfall. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster of deceit, bias, and ultimate redemption in the quiet town of Eastonville. We witnessed how prejudice and assumption can spark chaos, but also how integrity and resilience can turn the tide. Our determined Secret Service agent, Morgan Walker, showed that true strength lies not just in skill but in the courage to remain steadfast against injustice. Officer Reynolds and Sylvia learned that the cost of unfounded suspicion can be a heavy burden to bear, turning a seemingly small-town drama into a life-altering reckoning. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, if it made you question how we judge strangers or how we handle power, then please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Dark Stories. Together, we can keep these conversations alive, shining light on the hidden corners of human nature and the triumph of truth over bias.